one of the first nights, a bomb very close to the hospital went off, and there was a building that had 12 or 15 people in it. And they brought in 3 young girls, somewhere between the ages of 10 and 15, and all 3 had been killed. It was clear. And I remember one of them that her father had brought her in, and he was begging me to do something. He said, please work on her, work on her. And he said, it was 5 minutes. It's been 5 minutes. He just wanted some sort of hope. And to be able, I was not able to look at him and tell him that his daughter had died. Somebody else had to do it for me. I just couldn't do it. These kids have nothing to do with anything. And they're totally innocent. You look at them and they don't know what's going on. They hear the bombs dropping, but they haven't processed it. They're still trying to play games. They don't realize that there's not enough food. They don't realize that there's no water available. They're just looking at things through their own eyes. And you're just wondering what's going to become of them. What I struggled with the most is realizing that amidst all of this devastation, all of the trauma, all of the horrific stories, it's that these are things that are going to follow these kids for a lifetime. My name is Dr. Ahmad. I'm an emergency medicine physician in the south side of Chicago. I'm a Palestinian American. My parents came to the States in the 80s from Palestine. My wife is also a Palestinian. She was born and raised in Palestine. And I have 2 daughters who are Palestinian Americans. Since the war started, it's been hard to sit back and kind of watch what's been going on and not being able to do anything and feeling helpless. I was able to travel to Gaza as a part of a medical humanitarian NGO. Their name is Med Global. We joined an emergency medical team under the World Health Organization. Gaza has always been a difficult place to enter. There isn't an airport in Gaza that you can land in. And so we knew that we'd land in Cairo, and from there we'd set off and head to Rafah. Rafah is the border between Egypt and Gaza. On the way there are 6 checkpoints that try to make sure that anybody that's heading in that direction is supposed to be heading in that direction. So it's not like you can just hop in a cab and go straight for the border. The second you get close to the border, the first thing that strikes you is how many trucks of humanitarian aid are on the side. And the second we were able to get in and we went to the Palestinian side of Gaza, everything that has been going on for the last 3 months just hits you. There was this massive amount of people that were in Rafah. There are essentially over 1 million people there in a city that's built for probably 250 to 300,000 people. And just walking outside and seeing how many kids were hanging around their tents. They don't even have shoes because many of them had to rush out of their houses to get there. They're walking through. Some of them are waiting in line to get some water. That's something I still struggle with, because they didn't do anything to deserve this. You look at them, if you stare at them long enough, they'll smile back at you. And you know they're hungry, and you know they're cold at night, and you know that they're not going to school, they're not hanging out with their friends, they're not able to do anything that my daughter or my nieces are able to do. That eats me up.
This is basically the courtyard of Al-Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis. Everybody is staying right near where the hospital is.
Myself and a general surgeon, we were tasked with going to Khan Younis, Al-Nasser Hospital. And so what we heard was that Khan Younis at the time was under a pretty intense military campaign, and that they needed all the help that they could get. The first day at Nasser Hospital, right when we get off the bus and walk into the emergency department, I mean, it was shocking. The amount of people that were there, I mean, thousands of people hanging out. Any single space that could be occupied by a person, it was occupied either by somebody who had been displaced or a patient. This was nothing like I'd ever seen before.
The hospital is totally overwhelmed. The health system has totally collapsed. And the doctors here are overworked and very tired. They work in 24-hour shifts as well as the nurses.
It's a wave of patients. It's a wave of trauma patients. So the types of injuries we were seeing were pretty unique in the sense of these are war zone injuries in a very urban area. Khan Younis is a very urban area. We could hear the bombs going off, And 15 minutes later, you see somebody coming in who is wounded from a bomb. These are people who've had buildings collapse on top of them. They've had shrapnel fly everywhere, and it's penetrated through their skin. It's penetrated through their skull. You see people who are victims of burns, like really intense second and third degree burns. And you see a incredible amount of children who are the victims of this. There's also these drones that are there. They call them quadcopters, and they've got these very large caliber bullets. They're very traumatic, and we call them penetrating trauma because they go through your skin and they lodge somewhere in your body. And as a result of that, it just really tears up people's bodies. You know, I've done so many of these trauma procedures in the 3 weeks that I was there. I've done more so than I've done my entire career. You got to get used to a lot of different things, right? I mean, you got to get used to treating patients on the floor and doing procedures on the floor. These are procedures that need to be in a controlled environment. We need to make it as sterile as possible and as clean as possible for the patient. That goes out the window in Gaza just because of the sheer volume. And I'll give a small example. You know, when you have to make a cut or make an incision, typically here we have a scalpel. In Gaza, we were using razor blades that you would use for shaving. And it took me quite a while to adapt to that. I think the hardest thing by far is the amount of kids that are being affected by this. I think that's something that was incredibly hard to deal with. And I haven't dealt with it. And it's not something I'm going to be able to deal with. There was a 4-year-old. And she had essentially had her arm amputated. And they were working on transferring her out because she had developed an infection in her arm. And she needed more specialized care, especially if she wanted to keep most of what was left of her arm. I just thought about my daughter, who's almost going to be 3, and seeing her in that child. It just could have easily been us, right? I just saw myself in them.
Just a relentless bombing campaign that's taking place in Khan Younis now.
Shortly after, a bomb goes off. And it's intense. You feel it. The building shakes a little bit. The windows shake. Even you kind of feel it go through your body, like this force goes through it. Your ears close. I've never been that close to a bomb going off before. Each subsequent day, we felt like it was getting closer and closer. You could hear exchange of gunfire, and you can hear tank shells. There was no indication that the hospital would be attacked. People had not started to leave. Nobody had been told to evacuate. Probably around the 8th or 9th day that we were at Al-Nasser Hospital. In the emergency department, one of the windows was struck and broken. We could hear different gunshots hitting the wall of the hospital, and deciding that maybe we should be sleeping on the floor. And then as it's getting more intense, as the night is going on, maybe we should use our mattresses to cover the windows. I had heard about what happened at Shifa. It never clicked that that could happen to Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis. It never clicked for me until it really started to get very, very intense, and the hospital had suddenly become surrounded. And I remember the tank shelling. It's like you could hear every single movement that the bomb was making through the tank. You could hear when it was being loaded and when it was being fired, and then when it struck something. And I remember right when there seemed to be like probably 10 bombs going off, the tanks were firing and the building's shaking, and I thought the windows were gonna break, and I'm on the floor, and you feel like, okay, I mean, this might be it. This is where I could die. This is where I might be killed. And there's this loneliness, this helplessness. There's nothing you can do about it. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where was safe. And thinking, this is what life has been like here for almost 4 months in Gaza. This is what they've been dealing with. And that night, I remember that the hospital had started to fill up with smoke from the bombs. This whole time, nobody has told us that it's time to evacuate or to leave. And by the next morning, most of the medical staff had decided to take their families to safety. Many of the people in Khan Younis were leaving.
After an intense night of bombing and fighting and clashes, family members gather outside of the morgue in the Nasser medical complex.
I think at some point our colleagues and Med Global had decided, okay, it's time to pick you up from the hospital, regardless of whether this had been an approved route or if this was going to be safe for them.
The complex was surrounded by Israeli tanks. There was very intense bombing and exchange of gunfire.
So they came and they picked us up around the 12th day in the morning. And the following day we would go to Al-Aqsa Hospital and work there for a few days before ultimately leaving Gaza. And then I thought, what about the people that are not able to leave? I thought of all of the different patients who were too weak or too sick to get out of there, and they had to stay. There was this sort of understanding, I think, that there would be some doctors who were going to stay back no matter what. I don't know how somebody can make that decision. When nothing is safe and nowhere is safe, to kind of essentially say, I'm okay, they're going to kill me, but I'm not going to desert my patients. I think Palestinian healthcare workers are one of one. There's nothing and no one like them. They have seen the unspeakable. They have dealt with things that would traumatize people for a lifetime. They do it with grace, they do it with intelligence, and they do it with an ingenuity, a creativeness, a relentlessness, a resilience. They're heroes in every sense of the word. I think what's happened since then with the war on Gaza, it has woken up a lot of people, and it has made us realize a few different things as Palestinians. Most of the world is not going to hand anything to us. It's instilled this sort of motivation in all Palestinians that they want to make sure that that reality and that status quo doesn't persist. And if I'm ever given an opportunity to go back, if I'm able to go back and just see these people again, I would take it in a heartbeat. The second you are able to visit and sit with any of these people, it changes you. I think it makes you a better person, and it instills in you this sort of motivation to be able to help and give back and do something. Despite the destruction, the damage, the death, the horror, it's a special place with special people there.